Okay, I warned you that we were going to do some cooking stuff on the blog, and I'm doing it today. Our story begins. So one of the easiest things that the kids seem to love a lot is pizza, and rather than paying the money for a pizza and buying a big pizza at the places which cost 20, 30 bucks at a pop, I make it myself right down to the crust. So Abby, who's running the camera, will bring the camera a little closer, and we're going to start with, and I'll put the recipe up on the screen so you see it, but we start initially with water. You want to make sure it's warm water, not hot water, because it will kill the yeast. Yeast is the first ingredient. That's what makes it rise. What makes it kind of that way. If you like a thick crust, you'll use more yeast. If you like a thin crust, you'll use less. So you add the yeast to the warm water along with a couple tablespoons of sugar and a couple teaspoons of salt. And I use a whisk because it's easier that way. That's just why I use it. So stir it up. The yeast, the sugar, the salt, they all kind of mix together. And it looks a little soupy. It looks a little brown, but that's okay. That's the way it's supposed to look. The sugar activates the yeast, which makes it rise. Add a little bit of oil, a couple tablespoons of oil. I'm using olive oil. You can use regular oil. It all depends on what you want to do. But you do need the oils because it's kind of an agent that kind of binds it all together. So you put the oil in there, you mix that up. Once you've sort of got the liquid ingredients and the yeast mixed up, you want to add your flour. Pour that in. Make sure it all gets in. And you mix it together again. Again, I use the whisk initially just so that it mixes it together and it's smooth. Once we get to the point that it's not smooth anymore, then I'll start using a fork and kind of go from there and make sure that it mixes together and it mixes together well. Alright, so you see it's starting to thicken up here, and that's why I'm using the fork, because the whisk, the dough would get stuck in between all of the things, and I don't want to do that. So it's kind of runny. If it's a little too runny, you just add a little bit more flour. What you're actually going to do when you kind of spread it out on the pizza pan, if you have a pizza stone at home and you want to use that in your oven, that's fine. If you don't, you can go ahead and just use a pizza pan, which is what I'm going to use. But before you put it on the pan, or before you flatten it out loud, I should say, you want it to rise, which is our next step. While they raise here, I put them up here on the stove, and excuse the mess, but I do cook every day, so that's why it's kind of a mess. These two have to raise. I put them on the stove, not on direct heat, just so that the heat kind of helps the yeast activates to rise. My kids like hamburger pizza because there's a little restaurant in Omaha called La Casa that has this amazing hamburger pizza. This is nowhere near their crust or their sauce, but we'll come close. So, hamburger in a pan. I like to use cast iron just because I like the way it cooks better. And Teflon, if you scratch it, you can get all kinds of unknown health problems that they haven't quite figured out yet. So, I usually season it to taste. So I put some salt. This is about 1.5 pounds of hamburger. That's because I do 1.5 pizzas with hamburger, and the rest of it is cheese for the boys who are 9 and don't like the hamburger pizza. Salt, a little bit of pepper. I like to use fresh pepper, so I use fresh cracked pepper when on a pepper mill. You can use ground pepper if you like. If you want to use Canadian bacon, if you want to use pepperoni, you can do that too. But while this cooks, and we'll let it kind of cook up in the cast iron pan, the next step is I will go ahead and make my own sauce, which is the next step. So the sauce, something like this. Tomato sauce, real simple. I use the generic because it's cheaper, and since we're cooking with it and we're going to flavor it, it doesn't make as big a difference to me. Use a little bit of garlic salt because it needs a little bit of salt just because it's going to be fairly acidic and fairly tangy. Garlic, obviously, because you want garlic in the sauce. I use Italian seasoning. You can use whatever you want to use. If you want to use Italian, you want to use just some sage or maybe some oregano and basil, you can do that too. I tend to cover the surface of the tomato sauce with the Italian seasoning so it gives it some flavor. Now it's also, as I said, going to be kind of acidic, so a little bit of sugar. Not much, just a little bit, because if you put too much, then it's too sweet, unless that's what you're going for. Stir it up, as Bob Marley said. And you can see and smell, actually, that it smells a lot like a regular bought pizza sauce. And it's like anything else. Food is, some people say, art. So if you're going to do that, then you can go ahead and add whatever you want to it. Add more, add less. You can add some meat to the sauce and then put just cheese on top. The possibilities are endless, I suppose. So as that sits and steeps, and the longer it sits with the seasonings in it, you can even do it the night before so that the seasonings tend to kind of by osmosis go into the sauce. It'll taste even better. I do this in a hurry, so this is taking longer than I normally take, so I'm going to go check the hamburger now. Sauce, meat crust. So it rose once. I already spread it out because I didn't want you to see how messy my hands got when I did it, because I did it wrong the first time. I made sure that I sprayed the bottom of the pan with some cooking spray, or you can use Crisco or butter if you want to be a little less healthy. The reason we do that is because about 5-10 minutes into the cooking process, we want to take the pizza off the pan and put it directly onto the oven rack. So, sauce, we add a little bit to each pie. And then obviously use the back of your spoon and spread it around. Try not to use a fork or a slotted spoon because it will catch pieces of the crust as you're spreading it around. You wouldn't think that's a big idea until you have pieces of dough stuck in your spoon and you can't get it off. So don't do that. So we spread it on each pie. One of these is going to be 1/2 to 3/4 cheese. The other one is going to be pretty much all hamburger, which you will see in just a moment. So the hamburger's cooked. I tend to drain it of the fat and put it in like a Pringles can or something that I keep around. And then I put it on some paper towels on a plate so that I can drain the rest of the fat off, and I pat it dry so that you don't have as unhealthy of a pizza, and then you don't have any grease kind of dripping off when you're making it, because there's nothing more annoying than a really greasy pizza. So that is done that way. The sauce is on our pies. I'll take the hamburger onto each of these and kind of spread it around. And yes, I made a mess. My daughter says like Rachel Ray, or my real name's Raymond, so Davy Ray. It's okay if it's a little heavy, because this crust, particularly this recipe, gets a little thicker, so it'll handle the extra weight of the extra ingredients. So if you want to pile on some extra pepperoni or hamburger or Canadian bacon, whatever you might happen to have, it's okay to put that on there. This one I'm going to do half cheese, half pepperoni, half hamburger. So I don't want to get it all the way across, or the boys won't eat their half of the pizza. As I'm sure most of you know, if you've tried to feed boys or girls who won't eat hamburger or other meats on their pizzas. So, half like this, and half cheese. So I liberally spread the 6 cheese blend on top of this pizza. Mainly because there's a lot of protein in cheeses, and a lot of calcium, a lot of dairy. So that way at least the kids get some of that. It's not saying it's the most healthy of foods, but at least it's homemade. I don't put quite as much on the hamburger side because it's going to be heavier and it'll weigh down the pizza. We don't want to do that. But for the hamburger pizza, I use Romano cheese. We found that it's a little more pungent, it's a little richer, it counteracts the hamburger pretty well. So I usually buy a pack of Romano. It's a little more expensive. You can just use mozzarella if you want. It's no big deal. But we like this. It reminds us of the little pizza place in Omaha I told you about. So I don't put quite as much Romano on because, again, it's a pretty strong cheese. It's pretty pungent. It's very rich. And it's kind of salty. So we don't put. That's why I didn't put quite as much salt on the hamburger pizza as I did on the other. Make sure it kind of covers the sauce, because otherwise you got kind of a saucy crust and it gets kind of soggy. So you put this on here just so it barely covers it. It's okay if some hamburger's poking through. It's not going to kill you. So you put it in a 425-degree oven. Mine does convection, so you want to go 25 degrees lower. If yours doesn't automatically do it, mine doesn't, so I switch it to 400. I've got 2 shelves, so you want to make sure beforehand, unlike what I'm doing, put one rack in the middle, one on the below. Even the convection, you've got an exposed element underneath, excuse the dirty oven. So it will actually heat the bottom one a little bit more. So when we switch these out, we're going to switch racks so that it evens the cooking out. So you grab each pie. I tend to put the heavier one on the bottom because it'll take longer to cook. This one on the top. Usually 15 to 18 minutes. But instead of doing the full 15 to 18 minutes, set the timer for about 10. That'll start to brown it. It'll harden the bottom of it on that pan, because you can't just put the raw dough on the stove. And once that hardens up, we'll come back over here and we'll take the pan out from underneath and let it cook the rest of the way. All right. So we've started out. The pizza's risen quite a bit. You can see on both of these. So we're going to actually swap out shelves so that they cook a little more evenly. like thus. So, in order for the bottom to get a little more crisp, I sprayed the bottom of the pizza pan with some cooking spray. And then we slide the pizza onto the rack. So there's a hamburger. And then there's, oops, here's our cheese and hamburger. And we'll let these cook for another 10 minutes. Alright, so pizza is ready. You can see it's kind of a nice golden brown, it's not burnt. That's the hamburger. And then I have a separate cutting board for the cheese and hamburger. And it's ready to go. So we'll cut this and then get ready to eat dinner at the dinner table like we do every night. So there's only three. Abby's holding the camera, the fourth, but it was my turn to choose music, so I picked a record that I just got, and then we all sit down and listen to music while we eat dinner and get to hear the events of the day. So while this probably took a few minutes for you to watch, it probably took not that long normally for me to make this dinner. Probably less time than it would take for you to order a pizza, have it delivered, pay for them, and it's at least half the cost or less for you to make your own pizza. And the kids love the homemade stuff anyway. So thanks for watching, and hopefully next week or the week after we'll have yet another recipe. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.